What's up, guys? Chasing up a New 80s Revolution down here in the cave. Wishing you all a happy Easter and welcoming you to another episode of Whatever Happened To. Tonight we talk about the arcades of the 80s. Whatever happened to the video game arcades that we knew and loved? Many of us were introduced to video games through the home console, Atari, right? Atari 2600. ColecoVision and television if you were, a freak. But most of us either played the home console or our first exposure was at an arcade. Just standing there in front of these just beautiful graphics that we've never seen before, right? Atari 2600 arcade graphics, worlds different, right? We didn't even know that stuff existed. Just like with everything else back then. We just didn't know it existed, and when we found it, we were blown away. Anyway, we're going to talk about early memories of arcades, Chuck E. Cheese, Time Out, all of those things. My favorite games. I'll talk to you about some of my favorite games tonight. And then, of course, we'll collect your memories of arcades in the 80s, all tonight on Whatever Happened To Video Game Arcades. Yes, guys, arcades. Like I said earlier, probably for many of us, our first introduction to video games. We're going to talk about a few, because when I think of arcades, I think of a few different variations, a few different styles. And this all happened because I just took my kids to this place called the Clubhouse yesterday. And we played some miniature golf, and then as we were leaving, you have to pass through the arcade to leave. And of course, the kid, oh, please let us play. And I wasn't going to let them play because I didn't want them getting the crud all over their hands. All the little booger pickers just playing their arcades with their sloppy hands, and I didn't want the kids getting sick. But I caved and I bought. So I'm looking around for where do I get my coins? I got my $10. Where do I get my quarter? No, it doesn't work that way anymore, guys. You get a card. You get a card with your money on it, and you swipe your card to play your arcade games. And why am I calling them arcade games? Because they're not arcade games. They're not video games. They are stupid games of chance that spits out some tokens, or actually, it doesn't spit out anything. It puts the points back on your card, so you can trade your points in for a bag of Skittles or a plastic spider ring or something like that. No arcade games, no video games. They had one video game style game there, and it was just over the top, massive structure, Jurassic World. You get in, you sit, it just, you shoot this 4K screen of dinosaurs, just whatever, whatever. Just, of course, it speaks to the modern times and the modern minds of children. And I got to thinking, where's the arcades, So like I said, there were two ways that I was exposed to arcades. One not so much, and one pretty regularly. The regular one was the mall arcade. We had an arcade locally called Time Out. And I actually thought that Time Out was just exclusive to us, to Rochester, New York. It's not. Apparently Time Out was a national arcade chain for malls that I didn't know about. And that was pretty much my exposure to arcades, because I was only, first of all, at the height of arcades, I was like 6, 81, 82, 83 maybe. I was too young. I wasn't going to arcades. And by the time I was going to the mall arcade, I was probably like 11 or 12. So I missed out on the prime of arcades. And I'm talking like 1981, 1982, an arcade just on the street, right? You're just walking down the sidewalk and boop, you duck into the arcade. And you know what it was called? It was called arcade. That's right. It wasn't corporate. It wasn't commercial. It was the arcade. And I always see these in 80s movies, and I just love them. I have one of my favorite horror movies is called Nightmares. It's an anthology, and the first portion of the anthology is a video game movie with Emilio Estevez. And the opening scene of that movie is just awesome. It's just kids running down the street, trying to get into the arcade, kids outside the arcade. Doors are wide open all the time. There's like no doors on an arcade. You just go in. And then you go in and it's dark and there's noise and the lights and the music, and you got all the kids with the long feathery hair and the tight jeans and the jean jackets, and they're just banging away at machines, and I'm like, that's what I wanted to experience. And I never got to. I never got to go in one of those street arcades. So anyway, I love those. I love them, and I miss them. So we had an Atari 2600 when I was like 6, and my first trip to an arcade was Chuck E. Cheese. And of course, Chuck E. Cheese is nowhere to be found these days. We have them, but they're nothing in comparison to what they used to be. In fact, the Chuck E. Cheeses also all have those silly games of chance. Pull a lever. That's the game, guys. Pull a lever, the wheel spins, it'll stop on its own on a number, and that's how many points you've won. Those points go back on your card. You trade them in for a Tootsie Roll. That's it. There's your video game. Pull the lever and watch the wheel. Right. But back in the day, Chuck E. Cheese was pretty close to one of those street arcades. It was chock full of stand-up, coin-op 80s games. And I loved it. And we would have school parties there. I remember we would have a couple field trips to Chuck E. Cheese. Of course, the third grade birthday party is at Chuck E. Cheese, and you're running wild. You're playing stuff that you never played before. You're getting exposed to different games. You're seeing different games for the first time, and it's a wonderful feeling. So Chuck E. Cheese was first. I think second for me was a place called Olympic Bowl, which was a bowling alley. I went to this school called St. Pius, and we had a bowling league. And on Wednesdays, all the nerdy bowling kids would get the bus, and it would take us out to Olympic Bowl. And that place was huge. The bowling alley was like the biggest in Rochester. It had like 80 lanes, which if you're not a bowling guy, that's massive. And so they had a lot of space. And in the middle of the bowling alley, they had arcade games. Lots for a bowling alley. They probably had about 12 or 15 games, which is a lot for a bowling alley to have. And that's how I first was exposed to Mat Mania, the wrestling game. Beautiful game. I loved it. Of course, I loved it because it was just wrestling. And I loved it because it was a blowaway from the Atari 2600 wrestling, which was the only wrestling game that I had any experience with. So big difference between Atari and arcade. Mat Mania I loved. Double Dragon. Double Dragon was a huge favorite of mine. Loved it. One or two players didn't matter, and the sad part about that is you only had about 10 or 15 minutes after the bowling league ended to get the bus. And so we would scramble. I mean, we were there to bowl, but after that it was all about the video game. So we would scramble to play as much of a game as we could before the bus got called, because you had to go. Right? There was no way you were ever going to risk missing the bus. I mean, you would probably just die at the bowling alley if you missed your bus. So you had to go. And so oftentimes we would just leave the game in the middle to get the bus. Sad days indeed. Some lucky sap just comes around and gets to, finish my game because I had to leave. So the bowling alley was huge exposure. Mat Mania, Double Dragon, like I said. Punch Out, a very interesting early version of Punch Out. Not Mike Tyson's Punch Out, of course, but Punch Out, where Little Mac is kind of this weird green see-through character. I remember there was an arm wrestling game where you actually arm wrestled the game. The game had a big giant arm, and you had to push it down, and like it was a machine, so it would like push back really hard. Loved that. Loved it. And then as I would start going to the mall, in like the very late 80s, that's when the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle arcade game would come out, and now you got these 4-player games. You got these big systems, 50 cents a play, which was ridiculous. But if you got 4 guys, there was a pretty decent chance that you were going to be there for an hour or so, a couple hours, just banging away at that Turtles game with 4 guys. If you had 1 guy, you were dead in the first scene. But 4, you could get close to. And did anybody ever beat an arcade game? I mean, most of those games didn't have an ending, right? And if they did, it was some freakishly high level. But I think towards the late 80s and early 90s, the games started being beatable, like X-Men and Turtles and The Simpsons and games like that had an ending. If you could stand there for hours and lots of quarters, you might be able to beat an arcade game. But I miss them. I miss the concept. I miss the simplicity of it again. Why? Why did they go away? Well, because we started paying a lot of money to bring arcades home. We started spending a lot of money to bring the Nintendo home, to bring the Sega home. And even though they looked a lot different than those arcade games, we had no reason to go and waste our quarters and stand around all day, because we could sit home and play a watered down version of the same game. So I get it. I don't like it. I wish that we could still experience arcades. And they've come back, I suppose. There's some hipster restaurants near me that brought back the whole game and beer concept. They're basically bars where you go, and instead of having 3 or 4 pool tables, they've got 10 or 12 retro arcade machines that you go and play, and it's nice. It's okay. It's a niche, but it's not the same. And I wish I went to. I got married in Montreal many years ago. And it was strange. We were staying right in downtown Montreal. And I got a couple of Montreal friends of the channel. So, of course, say hello to you guys. But I was staying right in the middle of the city. I was in a hotel called Lowe's Vogue. And if you're not familiar, the streets of Montreal at midnight are the streets of Montreal at noon. They're the same. Just like New York City, just like Toronto. People are up. You're walking around. Your nightlife has just begun. And so I remember one night we stayed for like a week, and one night I wanted something to eat. I wanted to go explore the streets at midnight, and I did. And shockingly, as I was walking up on this, dumpling place, right next to the dumpling place, door wide open. Lots of sounds. What is that? Familiar sounds. It was an arcade. It was a street level retro arcade, and it was not a corporation. It was just called arcade, and you went in and quarters and tokens or whatever, and you played your retro games. That was awesome. Awesome. Couldn't believe it existed. I don't know if it's still there. This was 100 million years ago, but that's the only time I have seen anything that resembled an arcade. We have the Strong Museum of Play here in Rochester, and that's where the National Toy Hall of Fame is. It's not that great. Don't get excited, but they have a lot of space, and on one of their floors they turned it into an arcade. They did a whole video game floor, history of video games, and they added about 40 coin-op machines, 40 old school machines. Nothing really new. They got Pac-Man, and they got Turtles. So it's everything in the range, but nothing like the pull down the lever crap. And that is fun, and that's become a bit of an adult, hot spot. Usually the museum is very much for kids, but ever since they put in the arcade, they'll have like special nights a couple times a year where they, after the museum closes, adults can go in, get some food, get some beverages, and play in the arcade, which is great. The One-Up Arcade Company has brought back home arcades, very, very affordable, smaller cabinets where you can, enjoy Pac-Man and Golden Tee and NBA Jam and Space Invaders and games like that right in your house. I've had a couple of those, and then I sold a couple of those. I didn't have the space for it, and I don't know. I didn't want them. So I don't know. Maybe I don't want arcades back because I could have one in my house, and I chose not to. I know my man Upstate Johnny has several of those machines, and is he's pretty much, I have the cave. He's pretty much doing a home arcade with all those One-Up machines, which is very cool. I would be interested in the NBA Jam one because that you couldn't beat. See, we got Streets of Rage. And then we beat it in the first night because it was unlimited continues. And I was like, this cost me $300 and we just beat it. It's going back. So I exchanged it for Pac-Man, which was better. You're not beating Pac-Man. And I didn't have the space and I kind of lost interest. So I sold it. But anyway, maybe NBA Jam would be fun. I don't know. Or maybe I'd get sick of that too. Who knows? But you know what I'm talking about, though, when I tell you about the 80s movies that show the arcades and that vibe, that feeling. I very badly wish that I was a teenager in the 80s. Obviously, we talk all the time about how we'd love to go back and be kids of the 80s again. But I also missed out on being a teen in the 80s. And I think teens in the 80s had a lot of freaking fun. A lot of fun. And I really wish that I could have experienced that. A cool kid, not a kid that gets beaten up. Right, I would want to be a cool kid who gets the chicks, right? Who's got the long, I'd have the long feathery hair, and I'd love Def Leppard and all that. And, 81, 82, I would love to be like 15, 16 years old in 1982 and just experiencing that and going and hanging out at the arcade with a comb sticking out of my pocket. Yeah, that sounds amazing. But anyways, where have they gone? They're gone, just like everything else that was wonderful and fun and innocent and great. They're gone. Gone away. And now they're replaced with these Dave and Buster style of organizations that eat your money and give you nothing in return. No memories. No kid is going to lay up at night in his bed just thinking about how he just pulled down that lever 14 times and cost me $45. No kids. It's not going to happen. But I can sit here and I can tell you how much fun I had with Mat Mania and Double Dragon. Nobody's going to tell you how fun they had with the lever. It's not happening. It's over. Tell me your arcade memories. Which did you experience the street level ones? The ones that were just called arcade, or were you more of the Chuck E. Cheese timeout kids too, like me? Favorite arcade games? What do you got? List them below. Mat Mania, Double Dragon, or mine? What are yours? And we'll do it again. We'll come back. We'll do some more tomorrow. Got some other good stuff. Go check out Wrestling with the Past, Philly Spectrum 12184. Go watch that. Those shows aren't getting a ton of views, so I don't know if really people love them or not. If you don't want me to, sit down here and review the shows, let me know because it takes a lot of my time. If it's not something you guys want, I won't do them. But we'll have some more Whatever Happened To. I got a feeling there's going to be a G.I. Joe surprise tomorrow. Tracking says it should be here tomorrow. We might have completed the 1985 figure line tomorrow. Maybe. We'll see you then. Until then, we'll see you then. Until then, good night now.